Hi there! In today's tutorial we're going to talk about how to create a vintage rusted metal sign in Photoshop. So let's get started. Here I'm going to create a new document of 1280 by 720 pixels and hit create. I need to import an image that I'll use as the background image. So for that, let me create a new layer by clicking on the create a new layer button at the bottom of the layers panel. Let's rename this layer wall background. Let's go to file and then open and locate the image from the computer. Now I have this image opened separately, so what I'm going to do is hit Command A on a Mac or Control A on a PC to select the image, and then go to Edit and copy it from here, or hit the shortcut Command C on a Mac or Control C on a PC to copy it. And then I'm going to go to my document and have the wall background layer selected, and then go to Edit and then Paste, or hit Command V on a Mac or Control V on a PC to paste it. Now since the image is too large for this artboard, let's hit Command T on a Mac or Control T on a PC, and using one of the corners drag in to resize the image to the size of the artboard, and then click on the tick icon on top or just press enter. Now let's go to image and then adjustments and select hue and saturation option from here, and from the pop-up update the saturation to -57, leaving the hue and lightness untouched before hitting OK. Next, go to image and then adjustments and select levels from here. In the pop-up, set the levels of the shadow input level, which is the black slider, to 0. The mid-tone input level, the gray slider, to 1.22, and the highlight input level, which is the white slider, to 201. Also set the highlight output level, the white slider, to 153 and then hit OK. Now let's go to image and then adjustments and go to selective color adjustment layer. Selective coloring is a tool used in Photoshop that allows you to cross-blend your individual color channels using sliders within Photoshop. This allows you to add blue hues to your shadows, gold, yellow tones to your highlights, and everything in between to help make your image look great. So from the colors drop down, select yellows and update the reading to 100 for cyan, 100 for magenta, 58 for yellow, and black gets a 0 here. The difference between these two settings within the panel is pretty simple. Relative takes the value of the color tone in the image and then changes it by a percentage of the total. So for example, if your image is 50% red tones, adding 10% to the red slider is actually going to add 50% of the 10%, bringing the total to 55%. Whereas absolute is going to work in absolute values, meaning the 10% adjustment is going to adjust that color by 10%. So for the sake of simplicity, just think of relative being a much more subtle option to use, and absolute being far more dramatic in its adjustments. I usually use relative, so let's select relative here. Let's move on to cyans from the colors drop down and update the cyan value to -90, magenta to 100, yellow to 40, and black to 60. Also update the method to relative and then hit OK. Now our background is set, so let's click on create a new layer button to make a new layer and rename it classic sign. With this new layer selected, I'm going to grab the rectangle tool and then update the curve setting to 25 pixels for rounded corners and then make a rectangle. Now let's center align it. With the classic sign layer selected, go to FX option from the bottom of the layers panel and select drop shadow. In the settings, change the blend mode to multiply and then click on the color option and update the color to 141715 and hit OK. Now update the opacity to 90%. Check the Use Global Light box and update the angle to 120 degrees. Update the distance to 5 pixels, spread to 0, and size to 6 pixels. Also, update the noise to 0%. Now click on Bevel and Emboss tab on the left. The style should be Inner Bevel and Technique Smooth. Update the depth to 664%. Update the size to 3 pixels. Change the highlight blend mode to overlay and its opacity to 75%. Change the shadow mode blending to multiply and click on its color and update it to 00, 00, and 00 and hit OK. Let's also check if the highlight mode color is set to FF, FF, and FF. Perfect. Now change the opacity of the shadow mode to 30% and hit OK. It's time to create another layer, so click on the Create a New Layer button at the bottom of the Layers panel and rename it Texture. Now go to File and then Open and locate the image from the computer. Since this image has opened separately, much like any other image in Photoshop, let's hit Command A on a Mac or Control A on a PC to select it, and then hit Command C on a Mac or Control C on a PC to copy it, and then get back to our document and have the texture layer selected, and hit Command V on a Mac or Control V on a PC to paste it here. At this point, let's hit Command T on a Mac or Control T on a PC, and using one of the corners, drag in to resize this image to the size big enough to cover our white rectangle, and then center align it. Now right click on the texture layer and select Create Clipping Mask, and a mask shall be created on our white rectangle. Let's go to Layer and then New Adjustment Layer and then Selective Color from the list. I don't want to rename my layer, so just hit OK, and you shall find a new Selective Color layer being created in the Layers panel. So have it selected and right click and create Clipping Mask. You'll find the Selective Layer panel under Properties, so under Colors, have Reds selected and update the reading to 100 for cyan, minus 100 for magenta, 100 for yellow, and 100 for black. Now from the drop down, move on to yellows and update 56 for cyan, 64 for magenta, minus 100 for yellow, and 100 for black. Next, move on to greens and update 100 for cyan, 100 for magenta, minus 100 for yellow, and minus 100 for black. Next, move on to whites and update 0 for cyan, 0 for magenta, 11 for yellow, and 6 for black. Finally, move on to neutrals and just update 8 for magenta. Rest of the colors will be 0. Next, add another layer and rename it Car. Now go to File and then Open and locate the image of the car from your computer. By the way, I'll be putting a link of both the textures that we've used in this tutorial as well as the car's image in the description. So if you want to practice along, just follow the link and download these images. Okay, so we have our car here. So click, hold, and drag it to our document. The reason you don't see the car is because it is too big in size. So hit Command T on a Mac or Control T on a PC and drag in to resize the car. and then center align it to the metal plate. Once the position of the car is set, click on the Add Vector Mask button at the bottom of the Layers panel, and you'll find a white mask is created next to the car's thumbnail. Now go to the Texture layer and keep the Command key on a Mac or Control key on a PC pressed, and click on the Texture layer thumbnail to make a selection. At this point, you'll find marching ants around the texture, so press Command C on a Mac or Control C on a PC to copy the selection. Now go to the car layer and click on the white mask to select it, and then go to the Channels tab and then click on the car mask to make it visible, and then press Command V on a Mac or Control V on a PC to paste the texture image. Now you can make the car mask channel invisible as we have the texture copied on top of the car. Next, go to the Layers panel, and with the car mask selected, go to Image, and then Adjustments, and then Levels. Here you can play with the settings depending on how you want the image to look. I'm going to have my shadow input level set to 49. My mid-tone input level set to 0.51, and my highlights input level set to 195, and then hit OK. It's time to add the text, so grab the text tool and click on the artboard, and with the sample text selected, change the font color to white from the toolbar above. I'm going to use the font Clarendon for this one, and you can use any chunky font that fits the bill. Then I'm going to increase the font size to 250 points and change the text to classic. And then I'm going to place it in the bottom center of the texture. Now let's add some styles to our text here. So with the text layer selected, go to the FX option at the bottom of the Layers panel and select Drop Shadow. Let the blend mode be multiply, but click on the color to change its code to 00, 00, and 00, and hit OK. Update the opacity to 100%. Update the distance to 1 pixel. Spread to 0, and size to 0. And then move on to Inner Shadow and update the blend mode to multiply, and click the color to update the color code to 00, 00, and 00 before hitting OK. Update the opacity to 50%, angle to -65, and also change the distance to 2 pixels, choke to 0, and size to 1 pixel. Now move on to Inner Glow. Let the blend mode be Overlay. Change the opacity to 38%. And then click on the color and update the color code to 46, 46, 46. And hit OK. Update the technique to Softer and size to 8 pixels. Also update the range to 50%. Now move on to Bevel and Emboss and update the style to Outer Bevel and change the depth to 500%, size to 0 pixel, and soften to 2 pixels. And then update the angle to 90 degrees and uncheck the Use Global Light option. Update the highlight mode to Color Dodge and let the color be FF, FF, and FF, and hit OK. And updates its opacity to 70%. Let the shadow mode be multiply and update its opacity to 40%. Also check to ensure the color code to be 00, 00, and 00 before hitting OK. Now move on to Stroke and change the size to 1 pixel and blend mode to Vivid Light and update the opacity to 5%, and then click on the color to change it to FF, FF, and FF, and hit OK. And then hit OK once more to close the layer style panel. Now we need to have the texture above the text as well. So click the Create a New Layer button at the bottom of the Layers panel, and then go to the Texture layer and hit Command A on a Mac or Control A on a PC to select it. And then hit Command C on a Mac or Control C on a PC to copy it. Now go to the new layer that you've just created and hit Command V on a Mac or Control V on a PC to paste the texture layer here. And then right click and select Create Clipping Mask. And now your text is also under the texture. With the new layer still selected, go to Create New Fill or Adjustment Layer option and select Gradient Map, and a Gradient Map layer will be created. So select that layer and then right click and select Create Clipping Mask. Click on the gradient bar just above the Layers panel, and from the pop-up, double click on the color stop in the extreme left and update the color to BC, BC, and BC, and hit OK. Now change its location to 30%. Click right below the gradient bar to add another color stop, and then double click on it and update the color code to 868981 and hit OK. And then change its location to 53%. Add another stop and change its location to 73%. And then double click the stop and update the code to CF3854 and hit OK. Lastly, double click on the color stop sitting at the extreme right and update its color code to 94274E and hit OK. And then change its location to 91%. Actually, I'd like to update this color a bit, so let's double click on this color stop once again. And let me choose the color using the color picker. I think I'll go with this. So the code for this is DA0F30. And let's hit OK. And now we can come out of the gradient editor. It's time to add the metal bolts to our steel plate here. So let's create another layer and then grab the brush tool. And let's pick a hard brush and lower the brush size to 35 pixels. And then click once on all the four corners as illustrated. Let's also change the layer name to bolts, because we've made quite a few layers. Now double click the bolts layer and go to drop shadow and let the blend mode be multiply and color black. Change the opacity to 52% and angle to 120 degrees. Update the distance to 3 pixels and size to 1 pixel, and also check the anti-aliased box. Now move on to inner shadow and let the blending mode be multiply and color black, but change the angle to -90 degrees. Also update the distance to 3 pixels, choke to 20 pixels, and size to 7 pixels. And uncheck the anti-aliased box here. Let's move on to outer glow and update the blend mode to color dodge and opacity to 21%. And lastly, change the size to 7 pixels and then move on to inner glow. Update the blending mode to color dodge here and also update the opacity to 30% and click on the color and change the code to FF, FF, and FF and hit OK. Also update the size to 10 pixels before moving on to Bevel and Emboss. Here, change the style to inner bevel, update the size to 1 pixel, and soften to 1 pixel. Update the opacity of highlight mode to 50% and opacity of shadow mode to 60% before hitting OK. With the same layer selected, drop the fill from 100% to 0% and you'll get the protruded bolt look. Next, create a new layer and then go to the wall background layer and hit Command A on a Mac or Control A on a PC to select it. And then hit Command C on a Mac or Control C on a PC to copy it. And then go to the new layer you've just created. And then hit Command V on a Mac or Control V on a PC to paste it here. And then go to the blending mode and select multiply. With this layer selected, go to the FX option at the bottom of the layers panel and select gradient overlay and select the blend mode to overlay and update the opacity to 43%. Change the style to linear and update the angle to 133 degrees. Also uncheck the reverse option and update the scale to 100%. Now click on the gradient and remove all the stops from the gradient bar except 2 on either sides. Double click on the color stop on the extreme left and update the color to 03, 02, 01 and hit OK. Now double click on the color stop on the extreme right and update the color code to FF, FF and FF and hit OK. And then come out of the gradient editor and hit OK once again to close the layer style. Finally, click on the Create New Fill or Adjustment Layer option at the bottom of the Layers panel and select Gradient Map and then click on the gradient. Click once on the color stop on the left and update its location to 12%. Now click once on the color option and update the color code to 9E, 8B, 7A and hit OK. Now double click the right color stop and update the color code to FF, FF and FF and hit OK. And hit OK once again to come out of the gradient editor. Now right click on the gradient map layer and select Create Clipping Mask. And there you go, the vintage rusted metal sign is ready. Alright guys, that concludes our session today. I hope you've enjoyed it and have learned something new from it. So do like, share and subscribe to my channel. Until we meet on Sunday, goodbye and thanks for watching.